They say old age is meant to be peaceful, a time to finally rest, surrounded by love and appreciation. But is that really true? For many, aging isn't about peace, it's about survival. Not because of illness or financial struggles, but because of the people around them. The family member who always asks for something, but never gives back. The friend who never listens, only talks about themselves. The person who constantly criticizes you, making you question your worth. Do these sound familiar? If so, you are not alone. The harsh reality is, not everyone around you wants your happiness. Some drain your energy, others make you feel small, and worst of all, you may not even realize it's happening. Welcome to Buddhist Wisdom for the Elderly, where we help you navigate the challenges of aging with mindfulness, wisdom, and inner peace. If you're new to the channel, we're so glad you're here. This is a place where you will find comfort, guidance, and the wisdom of Buddhist teachings to help you live a more peaceful and fulfilling life. The Buddha once said, "Your own self is your master. Who else could be?" This wisdom is more important than ever. In our later years, the people we allow into our lives decide whether we spend them in peace or exhaustion. Stay with us because today we're exposing these toxic relationships, people you interact with every single day but don't recognize for who they truly are. But most importantly, pay attention to part 3, because this is the one that could be silently breaking your confidence and self-worth. Once you recognize it, you will finally reclaim the happiness and peace you deserve. If you find this video helpful, please like and subscribe. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers and bring more valuable content to the elderly. Your support gives us the motivation to keep going. Now, let's begin. 1. The fearmonger. The one who fills you with doubt. Margaret used to be full of confidence. At 77, she had lived through wars, raised children, and built a life filled with love and wisdom. But lately, something had changed. Her neighbor, Helen, had a way of making her feel less. Whenever they talked, Helen would sigh and say things like, "Old age is just suffering, isn't it?" Or, "Have you thought about what will happen when you can't live alone anymore?" She'd bring up stories of people growing frail, losing their independence, becoming burdens. At first, Margaret brushed it off. But the more she heard these words, the more they took root in her mind. One day, while visiting her granddaughter at college, she noticed a beautiful tree on campus. Its leaves had turned golden, some already fallen to the ground. A student passing by saw her admiring it and smiled. "Isn't it amazing?" the student said. "In spring, it blossoms. In summer, it stands strong. And in autumn, it lets go. But even then, it's beautiful." Margaret felt a lump in her throat. Maybe aging wasn't about loss. Maybe it was just another season. There are people in life who constantly speak of fear, decline, and helplessness. They focus only on what is lost with age, rather than what is gained. These people, the fearmongers, spread doubt whether they mean to or not. Buddhism teaches that the mind shapes reality. If you surround yourself with people who see aging as suffering, you will begin to suffer. Even if your body is still strong, even if your heart is still full of life. The Buddha once told a parable about a man who carried a heavy sack of stones everywhere he went. When asked why, the man said, "Because I was told life is suffering." The Buddha replied, "Suffering exists, but why do you carry more than what is yours?" Margaret realized that Helen had been handing her stones to carry, but she didn't have to take them. How to free yourself from the fearmonger. Shift your perspective. Aging is not about losing, it is about evolving. Every wrinkle tells a story. Every year is a badge of wisdom. Limit negative influences. If someone constantly fills you with fear, distance yourself. Protect your peace. Surround yourself with joy. Seek people who celebrate life, not just mourn its changes. That evening, Margaret stood before the mirror again. This time, she didn't see loss. She saw growth, strength, a life well lived. She smiled. She was still her. she was still whole, and she was still beautiful. 2. The self-absorbed, the one who never listens. Eleanor had always been a storyteller. At 74, her mind was still sharp, filled with vivid memories of her youth. Her first job at a little bookstore, the summer she traveled through Italy, the moment she held her newborn daughter in her arms. These were stories she carried in her heart, stories that made up the rich fabric of her life. But lately, she had begun to wonder, does anyone actually hear me anymore? It had started subtly. She would sit with her old friend Linda at their weekly coffee meetup, excited to share a little memory from the past. You know, when I was young, I once... But before she could finish, Linda would interrupt. Oh, that reminds me of when I... And just like that, the conversation would shift away, her words swept aside like autumn leaves in the wind. At first, Eleanor thought it was just Linda's enthusiasm. But over time, she realized that no matter what she tried to say, Linda always redirected the conversation back to herself. It was as if Eleanor's stories, her life, didn't matter. One evening, as she sat alone on her porch, she thought about a teaching she had once read. When we speak, we plant seeds. But if no one listens, the garden remains empty. Eleanor closed her eyes and sighed. Her stories deserved a listener. She deserved to be heard. Psychologists describe self-absorbed individuals as those who lack true empathy. It's not always intentional. They are often so focused on their own lives, their own struggles, that they fail to recognize others. But in Buddhism, this behavior is seen as a form of attachment, a deep clinging to one's own self-importance. The more someone is consumed by their own narrative, the less space they leave for others. The Buddha once encountered a man who spoke endlessly about himself. The man boasted of his wealth, his achievements, his knowledge. Finally, the Buddha asked, if you pour tea into a cup that is already full, what happens? The man frowned. It overflows. Exactly, the Buddha said. A mind that is full of itself has no room to receive others. Eleanor realized she had two choices. She could continue feeling invisible, or she could change how she responded. Set the tone. The next time Linda interrupted, Eleanor smiled and gently said, I'd love to finish my thought. It's meaningful to me. Linda blinked in surprise but nodded. Limit exposure. If someone consistently dominates conversations, spending less time with them can preserve your energy. Eleanor started joining a local storytelling group where people actually listened and shared with kindness. Find those who uplift you. True friendships are built on mutual respect. When Eleanor shared her stories at the group, she saw the joy on people's faces. Their eyes lit up. She felt seen again. In a Buddhist monastery, an elder monk noticed a young disciple who always interrupted others. Instead of scolding him, the monk gave him a task. Go sit by the river every day and listen to the water. Do not speak. Just listen. Days passed, then weeks. The disciple began to hear the rhythm of the river, the rush of the current, the soft bubbling of the stream. Slowly, he realized the beauty in listening, not just speaking. Eleanor, too, had learned this lesson. In choosing where to invest her energy, she rediscovered something precious, the power of being heard. Her stories still mattered, and so did she. 3. The critic. The one who erodes your confidence. For as long as she could remember, Margaret had been trying to prove herself. Even at 76, she could still hear the voice of her late husband Charles echoing in her mind. He had always been a man of sharp words, never missing an opportunity to correct her. Why did you cook the roast that way? It's too dry. You spent how much on that sweater? You don't need more clothes. You're always worrying about little things. Just relax for once. At first, Margaret thought he was just offering guidance. After all, wasn't that what a husband did? Help his wife be better? But over the years, she began to notice how her shoulders tensed when he walked into the room. How she second-guessed herself before speaking. Even after Charles passed, his voice lingered. Every time she made a decision, Whether it was picking out a new dress or arranging the furniture, she would hear him in her mind, whispering doubts. She had spent so long being criticized that she no longer trusted her own choices. One afternoon, as she sat at her kitchen table staring at a puzzle she had been meaning to start, she sighed. Why even bother? A voice in her mind told her she'd probably get frustrated and quit halfway. But then she remembered something she had read years ago, a teaching from the Buddha. Just as a rock is not shaken by the wind, the wise remain unmoved by criticism. Margaret closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Had she been letting Charles' words spoken years ago, still dictate her life today? Psychologists say that chronic critics often project their own insecurities onto others. Their words have little to do with us, and everything to do with their own unhappiness. Charles had grown up with a father who was never satisfied, always pointing out his flaws. Perhaps that was why Charles had done the same to Margaret, because he had never known any other way. Buddhism teaches us that criticism is like an arrow. It only wounds us if we let it pierce our hearts. The Buddha once told a story of a man who insulted him repeatedly. But instead of reacting, the Buddha simply asked, if someone offers you a gift, but you do not accept it, to whom does the gift belong? The man frowned. To the one who offered it, of course. Exactly, the Buddha said. So if you insult me, but I do not accept your words, they remain with you, not with me. Margaret thought about this for a long time. Had she been carrying words that didn't belong to her? That evening, she made a decision. She would no longer let Charles's old criticisms dictate her life. Recognize intent. Was Charles truly trying to help, or was he simply mirroring his own childhood wounds? Respond calmly, internally and externally. The next time her mind whispered, "You'll just fail anyway," she responded aloud, "That's not true. I am capable." Create distance from the past and the present. Margaret chose to surround herself with people who encouraged her rather than tore her down. She joined a painting class, even though she had never painted before. One day, as she stood before her half-finished painting, an old friend peeked over her shoulder and said, "That's beautiful." Margaret smiled, and for the first time in decades, she believed it. Number 4, the manipulator, the subtle thief of your peace. Margaret sat in her cozy kitchen, the smell of fresh chamomile tea filling the air. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow through the window, and for the first time in a while, she felt a moment of stillness. She had spent decades working as a nurse, always tending to others. Now, in retirement, she had dreamed of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings. But then, the phone rang. She hesitated before picking it up. Her heart already knew who it was. It was her son, David. "Mom, I need a little help," his voice came through the receiver. Casual, almost expected. "Just until next week. You know how things are right now." Margaret closed her eyes. She did know. She had heard it too many times before. Rent, car repairs, unexpected bills, it was always something. At first, she had helped willingly. What kind of mother wouldn't? She had worked hard to provide for him as a single parent after his father left. She had given him everything. But over time, things changed. The gratitude in David's voice faded, replaced by expectation. When she hesitated, his tone would shift, gentle reminders about everything she had done for him before. "You always said you'd be there for me, Mom. What's changed?" That question weighed heavy on her. What had changed? The truth was, Margaret had begun to realize that her giving wasn't helping David. It was hurting him. He had never learned to stand on his own because she had always been there to catch him. In Buddhism, there is a teaching. A bird cannot fly if you never let it leave the nest. True compassion is not just about giving, it's about knowing when to give and when to let go. The Buddha once spoke of a man who constantly begged for food. Instead of feeding him daily, the Buddha taught him how to grow rice. Margaret thought about this one evening after talking to an old friend, a retired school teacher named Helen. When she confided in her, Helen simply smiled and said, "If you always open your umbrella for him, he will never learn to walk in the rain." Those words stayed with Margaret. So the next time David called, she took a deep breath and said, "David, I love you, but I can't always be the one to save you. You're stronger than you think. I believe you can find a way on your own." Silence. A sigh. Then, "Fine, I'll figure it out." And for the first time in years, as she set the phone down, Margaret felt light. Free. If you, like Margaret, feel trapped in an endless cycle of giving, remember, ask yourself, am I helping out of love, or am I afraid of saying no? Set boundaries with kindness. Saying no doesn't mean you don't care. It means you value yourself too. Visualize a peaceful life. A life where your time is spent on joy, not obligation. Your golden years are meant for peace, not exhaustion. Let go of what weighs you down and step into the tranquility you deserve. 5. The irresponsible. The one who burdens you. James had always been a good man, a devoted father, a hard worker, and someone who never hesitated to help those in need. Now retired at 78, he had envisioned his golden years filled with quiet mornings in his garden, sipping coffee and watching the birds. But peace had remained just a dream. The phone rang and his heart sank. He already knew who it was, his youngest son, Adam, calling again. "Dad, I hate to ask, but I need some help this month. The bills, it's just been tough." James closed his eyes. He had lost count of how many times he had heard this. Adam had struggled with responsibility his entire life, dropping out of college, losing jobs, making one bad decision after another. And James, being the loving father he was, had always been there to pick up the pieces. At first, it was just a small loan here and there. Then, it became regular. Over time, Adam stopped even pretending he would pay him back. James had sacrificed his own needs, giving away money he could have used for medical care, for small joys, for the quiet retirement he had earned. But no matter how much he helped, Adam never seemed to change. One day, James confided in his old friend, Henry, who had lived as a Buddhist monk for years. Henry listened patiently and then said, "If you always catch a bird before it learns to fly, it will never leave the nest." James sighed, "But he's my son. If I don't help him, who will?" Henry smiled gently. "That is exactly why you must let him learn. The Buddha teaches that every person is responsible for their own karma. If you keep carrying his burdens, how will he ever grow strong enough to carry his own?" James thought long and hard about Henry's words. Had he been protecting Adam, or had he been preventing him from growing? Buddhism teaches us that every action has consequences. This is the law of karma. When we interfere too much in another person's journey, we rob them of the lessons they need to learn. Just as a tree cannot grow strong if shielded from the wind, a person cannot become responsible if they are always rescued. The Buddha once told a parable of a caterpillar. A man, seeing it struggle in its cocoon, decided to help by cutting it open. But by doing so, he took away the struggle that would have strengthened the butterfly's wings. Without that hardship, the butterfly was too weak to fly. James finally understood. The next time Adam called, James took a deep breath and said, "Son, I love you, but I can't keep doing this. I will not fund your choices, but I will help you find a way to stand on your own." Adam was silent. Then, frustrated, he muttered, "Fine," and hung up. James exhaled. He knew Adam might be angry, even resentful, but he also knew something else. He had just given his son the greatest gift of all, a chance to grow. If you, like James, have someone in your life who constantly leans on you without taking responsibility, remember, shift from fixing to guiding. Instead of solving their problems, offer tools and advice. Set firm limits. Say, "I care about you, but I can't solve this for you." Redirect your energy. Invest in relationships where your love and efforts are appreciated. Your golden years should be filled with peace, not exhaustion. You are not abandoning them. You are allowing them to finally step into their own strength. 6. The ungrateful. the one who takes without appreciation. Martha had always been a giver. As a mother, a grandmother, and a friend, she had spent her entire life putting others first. She cooked meals for family gatherings, sent money when her children needed help, and even took care of her grandson when her daughter, Emily, was too busy with work. She never asked for anything in return. Just a simple thank you would have been enough. But those words never seemed to come. One evening, after spending the entire day preparing a beautiful Sunday dinner, Martha sat quietly at the table as her family ate. She had roasted the perfect chicken, baked their favorite bread, and even made an apple pie from scratch. She watched as plates were passed around, conversations filled the room, and laughter echoed. But something was missing. No one acknowledged the effort she had put in. No one said, "Mom, this is delicious," or "Grandma, thank you for making this meal." When dinner ended, they all stood up, left their plates on the table, and moved to the living room to watch TV, without a single glance back at her. Martha sat in silence, staring at the mess left behind. Her heart ached, but she said nothing. She told herself she was being too sensitive, that this was just how things were. But deep inside, she wondered, why did giving feel so empty now? Buddhism teaches dana, the practice of generosity. True generosity comes from a place of selflessness. It is the joy of giving, without the expectation of reward. But even the Buddha himself warned that where we give matters. He told a story of a farmer who planted seeds in barren soil. No matter how much he watered them, they never grew. But when he planted in fertile land, the crops flourished. Martha had spent her entire life planting seeds in soil that refused to grow. One evening, as she sat on her porch feeling forgotten, she recalled something she had once read. Kindness is a gift, but a gift should be given where it is cherished, not where it is expected. The realization hit her hard. She had been giving to people who no longer saw her kindness as a gift, but as an obligation. Martha made a decision that night. Give without expectation, and svirtasa. She reminded herself that true kindness should come from within. If gratitude was absent, that was their burden to carry, not hers. Reevaluate relationships. Was she giving to those who appreciated her efforts, or just to those who demanded them? Find fulfillment elsewhere. Instead of pouring her energy into those who took her for granted, she found new ways to give. Volunteering at a local community center, where elderly residents shared meals and conversations filled with warmth. One evening, after helping serve food at the center, a woman took her hand and said, "Martha, this was wonderful, thank you." It was just 2 words. But in that moment, Martha felt something she hadn't felt in years, appreciated. And so, for the first time in a long time, she gave and felt the true joy of giving again. 7. The isolator. The trap of loneliness. Richard had always been surrounded by people, his wife, his children, his co-workers, and his friends. But at 81, life had changed. His wife had passed years ago, his children were busy with their own families, and friends had moved away or grown distant. Days passed slowly now. The house was too quiet, the walls seemed to close in, and the sound of the clock ticking became his only company. He tried calling his daughter, but she was always in a rush. His neighbors were kind but distant. The loneliness felt like an ocean, vast and endless. One day, Richard sat on his porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, feeling invisible to the world. That's when he remembered a Buddhist teaching he had once read. Do not dwell on the past, do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. He realized that loneliness wasn't just about being alone, it was about feeling disconnected. But was he truly alone? Or had he simply stopped reaching out in the right places? Modern science confirms what many elderly individuals already feel. Loneliness is one of the greatest health risks in old age. Studies show that chronic loneliness increases the risk of dementia, heart disease, and even early mortality. But Buddhism teaches that loneliness is an illusion. In Buddhist philosophy, interconnectedness is a key principle. The idea of dependent origination states that everything in life is connected. Nothing exists in isolation. Just as a tree depends on the sun, the rain, and the soil, we too are part of a greater whole. Engage with your community, join social or spiritual gatherings, volunteer, or reconnect with old friends. Practice mindfulness in solitude. Instead of seeing solitude as emptiness, use it for self-reflection and peace. Give to others. Buddhist teachings emphasize that helping others heals the giver as much as the receiver. Even a small act, like checking in on a neighbor, creates connection. That evening, Richard made a decision. He joined a small meditation group at the local community center. He didn't need to say much. Just being there among others eased the weight on his heart. For the first time in years, the silence in his home didn't feel so heavy. He was not alone. He had never been. Aging is not just about growing older. It is about growing wiser. As we enter this phase of life, our time, energy, and peace become our most valuable treasures. Protecting them is not selfish. It is necessary. Through today's discussion, we have uncovered the hidden burdens that many of us unknowingly carry. The fearmonger who fills us with doubt. The self-absorbed who never truly listens. The critic who slowly erodes our confidence. The manipulator who takes advantage of our kindness. The irresponsible who refuses to take control of their own life. The ungrateful who drains our spirit without appreciation. The isolator who traps us in loneliness. But here's the truth. You have the power to break free. Buddhism teaches us that peace is a choice. It is something we cultivate, not something others give to us. The Buddha reminds us, do not seek peace outside yourself. Peace comes from within. So starting today, let us take back control. Set boundaries with those who drain you. Surround yourself with people who uplift and respect you. Let go of those who make you feel small. Give your kindness to those who truly value it. Which of these 7 people do you recognize in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to hear your experiences and wisdom. If this video resonated with you, give it a like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can continue sharing more meaningful content for the elderly. Your support keeps this channel going and helps us build a community rooted in wisdom, compassion, and peace. Thank you for watching, and remember, your happiness is your choice. Protect it, cherish it, live in peace.